Boldwood presents Family Secrets at Hedgehog Hollow, written by Jessica Redland and read by Emma Swan and Lucy Brownhill. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. The story so far. For Samantha Wishaw, the owner of Hedgehog Hollow Rescue Centre, and her boyfriend Josh Alderson, May kicked off with a busy weekend of activities to celebrate the official opening. The events went swimmingly, but Sunday finished on a low when Josh's ex-girlfriend Beth, pregnant with her second child by his estranged father Paul, showed up at the farm, demanding to speak to him. Josh had refused to have anything to do with Paul or Beth after their relationship came to light, and he wasn't about to change his mind. He had no intention of building a relationship with his half-brother Archie either. Beth returned to Hedgehog Hollow a week later, but collapsed, meaning Josh had to make contact with his dad for the first time in 18 months. Their reunion was far from pleasant. It was a challenge for Josh to have his dad thrust back into his life when he'd sworn he wanted nothing to do with him ever again, especially after the impact the news of the affair had had on his mum, Connie. She'd been devastated by the affair and had unintentionally overdosed on paracetamol. Josh had found her and, although she made a full recovery, he could not forgive his dad for what might have happened. Connie, now retraining as a counsellor, was in a really positive place. She absolutely was not looking for love, but that changed when Alex came back into her life. They'd briefly met 5 years previously, but nothing had happened, and they were both grateful for a second chance. Samantha asked Josh to officially move in. While her friends Rich and Dave helped him move his belongings across, she visited her cousin Chloe in Whitsborough Bay. Chloe seemed uninterested in the news about Josh moving in. She only became animated when Sam admitted that she was struggling to balance her many responsibilities. With word spreading and more hedgehogs arriving, Samantha was concerned she'd taken too much on, trying to run the rescue centre alongside a full-time job. While Samantha was at Chloe's, her mum paid an unplanned visit, and their encounter was as unpleasant as usual, resulting in Samantha leaving early and driving a wedge between her and Chloe yet again. The barn was defaced by graffiti in the early hours of the following morning, and the arrival of a first litter of abandoned hoglets added more pressure to an exhausted Samantha. Josh mooted the idea of her resigning from her job to work full-time at the rescue centre, where her heart lay. Now, living with her, his salary could cover the food and bills, but she didn't want to let anyone down by leaving her tutoring role after less than a year. But after fainting at work, Samantha admitted that things had to change and accepted Josh's financial support and her boss Lauren's blessing to resign from her job with immediate effect. Beth asked Josh to meet her. Knowing she'd never leave them in peace if he didn't, Josh reluctantly agreed. She revealed that Paul had been diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma, a form of blood cancer. The first round of chemotherapy hadn't been the anticipated success, and he was about to embark on a second round while looking for a stem cell transplant donor. Josh and Samantha visited his dad, but a neighbour told them that the family had been taken away in an ambulance. Fearing the worst for Paul, they raced to the hospital to discover that Beth was the one in danger. It had been raining heavily, and she'd slipped and fallen down the wet communal stairs. Baby Lottie had to be delivered early, while Beth fought for her own life. Both proved to be fighters, but the family were going to need a lot of support. So Samantha suggested to Josh that Beth and Paul move into the farmhouse. The time Josh spent at the hospital supporting his dad had massively improved their relationship, so they accepted the offer to move in after Beth and Lottie were discharged. Samantha took a pregnancy test to rule that out as the cause of her fainting, and was surprised to feel relieved by the negative result. She'd always wanted children, or believed she had, so she invited her best friend Hannah to the farm to discuss it. It came out that she was terrified of having children in case she turned out to be like her own mother, who had treated Samantha so cruelly all her life. Hannah encouraged her to open up to Josh about her fears, even though Samantha was afraid that telling him she didn't want children could mean the end of their relationship. Josh was understanding, and although he'd have ideally liked children, Samantha was more important to him. He didn't want her to make such a major life decision based on a belief that her mum's personality had changed after Samantha was born, so he invited her dad, Jonathan, to the farm to discuss it. Jonathan revealed that Debs, Samantha's mum, had changed as a result of a trauma some years before Samantha was born. After walking home alone drunk, she was raped and left with long-term emotional wounds for which she refused support. Samantha secured a new friend and committed volunteer, trainee veterinary nurse Fizz, when she brought in some rescue hoglets. While Fizz was helping feed them, the barn came under attack again. Samantha was assaulted when a box of eggs was hurled at her, splitting her cheek open. The Grimes cousins, Bryn and Cody, were already behind bars, and it turned out that Cody's younger brother, Connor, and a friend of his had picked up the mantle. They were both on parole, so were sent back to continue their sentences, and the police assured Samantha and Josh that the extended family had been spoken to about the serious consequences of anyone else getting involved. Paul's family moved into the farm, and a few days later, Josh, Paul and Beth addressed what had happened and why. The past couldn't be changed, and the hurt caused wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon, but a fresh start was needed for everyone. So Josh drew a line in the sand and agreed to move on. Samantha started to accept she wasn't like her mum and that children might be a possibility. Josh didn't want her to feel pushed into it, so he decided the timing was right to show her he loved her unconditionally. On the night they released the last of the original rescue hedgehogs, he proposed and she accepted. Chapter 1. Samantha. I sat on Thomas's bench with a mug of tea in one hand, the other hand stroking Misty Blue's warm belly as she lay sprawled across my lap. "Listen to that," I said to her, cocking my head to one side. "Isn't it so peaceful?" The only sounds were the chirp of birds, the buzz of insects, and Misty Blue's gentle purrs. "No babies crying for once," I added, not that I really minded. Archie and Lottie were adorable. Their parents, Paul and Beth, were also great house guests. They couldn't have done more to help with the cooking and cleaning, despite Beth still recovering from a near-fatal fall down the stairs at her flat, and Paul, Josh's dad, having Hodgkin lymphoma, a type of blood cancer. Closing my eyes, I tilted my head back towards the sun. It was a bright, warm Sunday in the middle of June, so Paul and Beth had taken advantage of the gorgeous weather and driven Archie and Lottie to the coast. Josh, owner of Alderson & Son Veterinary Practice, had been called out to a goat emergency an hour ago, so I was on my own at Hedgehog Hollow, enjoying a rare and precious moment of tranquility. After a few minutes, I opened my eyes and sipped contentedly on my tea. My heart fluttered as the diamonds on my engagement ring sparkled in the sun. We hadn't made any plans for when we'd marry yet. It didn't feel right to set the date until Paul had been through the next round of chemotherapy later this month. And we were, of course, still hoping a stem cell donor would be found. Everyone had been thrilled at the announcement of our engagement. We'd invited our closest family for afternoon tea last Sunday so we could share the news. After that, I'd called my best friend Hannah, who excitedly squealed down the phone. I tried my cousin Chloe next, but she didn't answer. Loyalty towards her, after years of close friendship, meant it didn't feel right for her mum, my Auntie Louise, to hear first, so I held off phoning her, trying Chloe repeatedly over the next few days, but without success. On Thursday, fed up that messages to get in touch urgently had seemingly been ignored, I phoned Auntie Louise, who was also delighted. Then I texted Chloe. To Chloe. Josh asked me to marry him. I'm so excited. I've been trying to get hold of you all week, as I ideally didn't want to tell you my big news by text, but you haven't responded to my messages and I'm worried. I hope you're okay. Hot tip. There's a woman on a farm in Huggleswick who is always here for you. You know where she is if you ever need her. Kiss, kiss, kiss. So far, she hadn't responded, and I was determined not to let it dampen my excitement. If Chloe had decided to have an epic strop, I wasn't going to bend over backwards this time. I'd waved the white flag plenty of times, and now it was her move. I'd also sent a quick text to Mum. To Mum. I hope all's well with you. Just letting you know that Josh asked me to marry him and I said yes. Not planning to set a date yet. Sam. Kiss. She hadn't responded, but I hadn't expected her to, although I had hoped she might. Even if it was just one word. Congratulations. I wasn't going to let her dampen my excitement either. I swallowed my last mouthful of tea. Right, Misty Blue, it's back to the hoglets for me. She leapt off the bench and bounded towards the meadow to chase butterflies, and I headed for the kitchen. As I rinsed my mug and plate in the sink, I gazed out of the window and spotted a car driving at speed along the farm track. Hedgehog emergency? I dried my hands and rushed to the farmyard to help, then stopped dead, my heart thumping. Hang on, that's Chloe's car. She screeched to a halt with a spray of gravel beside me, yanked on the handbrake and leapt out. "Did you mean your hot tip?" she cried. "What?" "In your last text, you said you were always here for me. Is that true?" "Of course. What?" She removed her sunglasses, revealing red, swollen eyes. "Good, because Samuel and I need to stay here. I've left James." I stared at her, mouth agape. Surely not. She and James were devoted to each other. Gathering myself, I held out my arms and moved towards her, but she backed up against the car, clearly not wanting a hug. "What happened?" I asked, thrusting my hands into my jeans pockets. Her jaw tightened. "I don't want to talk about it." I wasn't going to push it. That tone clearly announced no-go zone. She pushed a strand of straggly hair behind her ear, and I couldn't help but notice how dishevelled she looked in a creased t-shirt and leggings, with her long blonde hair pulled back into a messy ponytail. She was makeup-free and her cheeks were blotchy. It was such a contrast to what I was used to, a woman who normally wouldn't leave the house without her hair styled and wearing full makeup. "So, can I stay?" she demanded. "Yes, of course you can. Slight problem, though. We don't have a spare bed." She frowned. "How come? Did your dad move in after all?" "No." "Then I can have his room." I shook my head. Josh's dad and his family are living with us at the moment. They have what was going to be Dad's room, and... She planted her hands on her hips. "What? Why? You told me Josh hates his dad and wants nothing to do with him and his little slapper." I winced at the insult and bit down the urge to point out that it was like the pot calling the kettle black, considering Chloe had slept with James while we were still together. I know, but a lot's changed recently. Would have been nice to have been kept in the loop. Well, perhaps if you'd returned my calls, you might have been. But there was no point in retaliating. "Seems I'm always the last to know things," she added in a softer voice, her eyes glistening before she put her sunglasses back on. I wasn't sure whether that last statement was a dig at me or whether it was linked to the reason she'd left James, so I decided to try again. "What's he done?" I asked gently. She shoved her shades up onto her forehead and glared at me. "What part of, I don't want to talk about it, don't you understand?" "Okay, sorry, I won't ask again." I put my hands up in a surrender sign. Clearly, Chloe was distressed, and I needed to focus on that. I had meant it when I'd said I'd be here for her. I wanted to help if I could. I glanced towards the farmhouse, a 3-story, ivy-clad stone building, trying to think of the best solution. "I can offer you one of the 2 rooms on the top floor, and—" "The attic!" She screwed up her nose in apparent disgust. "It's a proper story, and the rooms are huge. They're clean and freshly painted, but there's no furniture in them yet. We've got an airbed and some bedding, but that's the best I can do for now. Like it or lump it." I could hear the sharp edge to my voice, but what did she expect? Turning up unannounced and expecting 5-star luxury accommodation to be ready at the click of her fingers, then insulting my beautiful home was not the best start, especially when she'd been ignoring my calls and had been hostile when we last saw each other. She sighed. "OK, it'll have to do. I'll take whichever one's en suite." She obviously spotted my grimace. "Oh my God, tell me there is at least a bathroom up there." As tears pooled in her eyes, I felt guilty. Something pretty horrendous had to have happened if she'd left James, and me being defensive about my home was not helpful. I softened my voice. "Sorry, I wanted to live in the house for a while before I decided how to use the space. And I wasn't expecting 3 adults and 3 babies to move in with me before I could do that. Shall we start by getting Samuel and your stuff inside?" I asked, keen to break the uncomfortable silence. I opened the back door on her car and reeled back at the overpowering stench. "Oh yeah, I had to stop to feed him on the way and he puked afterwards. I think he might have had an explosion at the other end too. Babies are so adorable." There was humour in her tone, but the high pitch of her voice and the awkward shuffling on the spot suggested it was no laughing matter, and she was close to hysteria. Taking a deep breath, I poked my head back into the car. There was no mind about it. There'd definitely been a double-ended incident. Samuel was asleep, his face smeared, his clothes drenched. The back seat was going to need several sponge downs, followed by a damn good airing, a task I could not see Chloe willingly taking on. I already knew she'd turn on the tears and I'd feel sorry for her and offer to do it. It was how it had always been with us, and I hated that I knew it, yet would still let her manipulate me. My poor little namesake could not be comfortable. In Chloe's situation, I'd like to think I'd have found somewhere to pull over again and do my best to clean him up with some baby wipes, change his nappy and dress him in fresh clothes. But I wasn't in her situation. I didn't even know what her situation was. "We'll need to get him bathed and changed," I said, lifting out the baby carrier and passing it to Chloe, who curled up her lip and held it out away from her body. "I'll grab the things we need for Samuel now, and we can get the rest later." "I need to get showered and changed too." I winced at her whiny tone and counted to 3 in my head before I could answer, knowing I'd have snapped otherwise. "You can, but we need to sort him out first. Look at him." "But I—" And then the tears started, and I knew it would be me sorting Samuel out, and that, very likely, this would become a recurring theme for however long she stayed.
Chapter 2. Chloe. Earlier that morning. Wah! Each high-pitched cry made my head thump and sent a shudder down my spine. I squinted at my phone. 9:07 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and just over 2 hours since his last feed. Ugh. "I'll go." James rolled over to a sitting position, pulling the duvet with him. A blast of cool air chilled my now exposed arm and leg, bringing me out in goosebumps. "And what good's that going to do? Can your body produce milk?" "No, but—" I tutted as I flung back what he'd left me of the duvet. "And don't even think about suggesting bottle feeding him again. He's not even 4 months old yet." "Wouldn't dare." The words were muttered under his breath, but I gave him a hard glare so he knew I'd heard, and I wasn't impressed. "For God's sake, Samuel, where's the fire?" I shouted as I stormed across the landing to the nursery. I whipped off my PJ's top, grabbed him out of his cot and plonked down on the nursing chair. Within seconds, he was sucking greedily on my sore nipple. Clenching my jaw, I focused on the view out of the window. Not that there was much to look at. Samuel's nursery was at the rear of our new-build house, and from where I was seated, I could only see the back of the house behind us. Not exactly the most awe-inspiring vista to take my mind off the agony. "Maybe you should ask your midwife about the pain." I hadn't heard James approach. "I've told you before, I don't like the woman. She's a patronising cow." "Then ask for a different midwife, or ask Sam for help." I glared at him. "Sam? You're joking, right? The lady of the manor hasn't got time for me these days. Barely notices my existence. especially now that she's got the amazing Josh super vet. I steeled myself for some comment about sarcasm being ugly, but none came.
Didn't you say she phoned the other weekend?
A fortnight ago. Oh yeah, and a great conversation that was. Barely lasted 5 minutes. I hadn't told James that I was the one who'd hung up. Even I could see that it didn't paint me in a good light. Although, who could blame me? All she'd done was witter on about the weather and ask about Samuel. What about me? Didn't I matter anymore? I hadn't told James that Sam had been trying to get in touch with me all week either. I'd come so close to answering each call, but couldn't face the awkward, stilted conversation, as though we were strangers. And then she texted me telling me she was engaged. Texted? Who does that? Biggest news ever and she lets me know by text. That certainly put me in my place. Right at the bottom of her priority list. Thanks a lot, Samantha Wishaw. James ran his fingers through his dark blonde hair and gave me a gentle, understanding smile. I looked into his piercing blue eyes and I swear my heart skipped a beat. From the moment I first saw him, I was lost to that man. He somehow always seemed to manage to calm me down. Something he'd had to do a hell of a lot recently. I smiled back, hoping it conveyed an apology for being so snappy, again.
Don't worry about Sam,
he said, his voice full of reassurance.
You'll probably hear from her a lot more often, now that she's working with the Hedgehogs full-time.
I stared at him, my eyes wide with disbelief, and that brief feeling of calm disappeared. Working with the Hedgehogs full-time? Since when? When she'd visited last month, she'd admitted she was finding it a struggle running the rescue centre while teaching full-time. But she'd also said resigning from her job wasn't an option. So what had changed? I thought you weren't in touch with her, I snapped.
I'm not.
Then how do you know more about her life than I do?
Because Toby told me when we met up.
And why were the two of you talking about Sam? Desperate to hear all about your ex-girlfriend? James sighed and shook his head slowly.
I can't talk to you when you're like this.
He turned to leave. Like what?
Angry. Jealous.
Oh, so there's something to be jealous about, is there? With another sigh, he left the room. I held my breath as he thundered down the stairs and, moments later, slammed the front door. I closed my eyes as I shakily exhaled. That went well, I told Samuel. Another delightful day in the wonderful life of Chloe Turner. Samuel and I were downstairs when I heard a car outside about 90 minutes later. I carried him over to the window and peeked through the blinds. James was back, and about time too. I'd been worried sick. I sat down on the sofa with Samuel on my knee and listened for the front door opening. Where the hell have you been? I shouted the moment he closed the door. Would it have killed you to text me? James appeared in the lounge doorway, looking sheepish. He held a stunning bouquet of flowers in one hand and a paper bag in the other.
I drove to the beach, went for a walk, and then I got you these.
He thrust the flowers towards me, but I didn't take them. What's in the bag?
I thought you might like some croissants for breakfast.
I knew the right thing to do was to thank him. The flowers were beautiful, and fresh croissants were my favourites. But I'd worked myself up into such a state while he'd been gone, terrified that he'd finally seen sense and left me, that I couldn't seem to do the right thing. All I could do was shout. So, you've been to the supermarket and you never thought to do the weekly shop? Nice one, James. Really helpful. His expression was one of clear dismay.
I thought you'd done an online order.
Well, I began one, but Samuel started crying and I never finished it.
Why didn't you say? I could have done it.
I winced at the all-too-familiar tilt of his head, an expression of pity in his eyes. That, right there, that was the reason why. I couldn't bear to admit that I'd failed at yet another thing and get that sympathetic look, which only made me feel even more inadequate. I was sick of everyone else having to come to my rescue. Why couldn't I get a grip on anything? And not just with Samuel. Our wedding would have been a disaster if Sam hadn't taken control of most of the plans. I need a shower. I thrust Samuel towards him.
Should I put the oven on to heat up the croissants?
I couldn't be bothered to answer. It wasn't exactly important, like everything about my life. I desperately needed to relax. My whole body felt rigid, and my teeth ached from the constant grinding. Yet even the powerful massaging flow from the shower couldn't work its magic and untense me. I seemed to constantly ache these days. I kept replaying this morning's spats with James. 2 so far. We'd be in double figures before bedtime. I knew that an extreme lack of sleep made me crabby, and James got the brunt of that, but honestly, it wasn't all my fault. He had to accept some blame, because he never thought things through. The situation just now was a prime example. If he'd told me he was planning to go to the supermarket, I could have asked him to do a full shop. But no, he'd stormed out of the house in his pathetic little man-strop, and I shook my head. I could hardly blame him for storming out of the house either. I'd caused that. And he probably hadn't been planning to go shopping at all, but had thought some flowers and croissants might cheer me up after a bad start to the day. So now I felt even more of a bitch for having a go at him as usual when he'd been trying to do a nice thing. Switching off the shower, I squeezed the excess water from my hair before rubbing it with a towel. With a fluffy bath sheet wrapped round me, I slumped down onto the toilet seat, head in hands, as the tears flowed. Was this it? Was this my new reality? No sleep, no sex, permanently tired and achy and sod all time to do anything. I couldn't decide whether weekdays or weekends were the worst. During the week, I was doing well if I managed to brush my teeth before lunchtime. Days passed me by in a blur of tears, dirty nappies and feeding, but at least there were no arguments. Until James arrived home from work, and then all we seemed to do was argue. Why was it all so damn difficult? Or was it only me who found that? Other new mums seemed to manage. Little Miss Perfect at the end of the road definitely did. She'd had her second baby a month after Samuel was born, and I spotted her every day without fail, pushing the double buggy past our front window, a huge smile on her perfectly made-up, smug face. She wasn't wearing smelly, creased PJs and looking like she'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. And she had 2 kids under the age of 1 to cope with. Unless that was her secret, she'd sussed it out with her daughter, so the son was a breeze, although I couldn't help feeling it was me messing it up, like I always did. James didn't need to say a word. The look he gave me when I stepped into the lounge said it all. Raised eyebrows, parted lips. I obviously disgusted him. I looked down at my crinkled t-shirt and grey sweatpants. Such a world away from how he was used to me dressing pre-Samuel. I glared at James. They're clean?
I didn't say anything.
His soft voice, tinged with the usual Chloe can't cope sympathy, and that tilted head wound me up again. You didn't have to. They're comfortable, okay? And it's not like we're going anywhere. James winced.
But we are.
Where?
My mum's surprise 60th.
My stomach did a backflip before I realised he was winding me up. Badly timed, but I couldn't face another argument on an empty stomach. I grabbed a croissant off the plate on the lamp table and took a bite. You're hilarious, I mumbled, my mouth full of warm pastry. That's next Sunday.
It's this Sunday.
No, it's the 14th.
And today is the 14th.
It couldn't be. His phone was resting on the arm of the sofa. I jabbed at the screen with a greasy finger and frowned at the date it showed. Mid-June already. Really? My mind raced as I looked toward Samuel lying on his back on his playmat, kicking his legs, his right hand gripping a Peter Rabbit comforter. Could I refuse to go? Say I was tired, feeling ill? It's not like I'd even be lying. I genuinely felt like crap. James stood up, put his arm round my shoulder and kissed the top of my head, making my heart race.
It won't be a late one, I promise. You know how much my mum loves her Sunday evening TV.
His tone was gentle but persuasive, and I knew there was no way I could back out. It wasn't fair on him or his mum. My parents lived a short walk away, but Nancy lived in York, an hour away. She was nervous behind the wheel and found driving to the local shops an ordeal, so driving to Whitsborough Bay was out of the question. Trains made her anxious too. She was paranoid about missing her stop, even though Whitsborough Bay, being on the coast, was at the end of the line, so impossible to miss. Yet it was a ready-made excuse, so we always had to traipse through to York instead. That meant she didn't get to see her grandson nearly as much as she'd have liked, because no way was I willing to make that trip every weekend, and I certainly wasn't going to drive through on my own, so she could coo over Samuel and barely notice my existence. I looked up into James's pleading expression, and my resolve crumbled. I could do it for him. I'd do anything for that man. And it was his mum's birthday, so it was only fair that we were the ones to do the travelling today. "What time do we need to leave?" I asked, trying my hardest to keep my tone light, when a 2-hour round trip for a 2-hour meal was my idea of hell right now. All I really wanted to do was lie on the sofa, and instead, I'd have to face a permanent replay of the same intrusive conversation from James's relatives. "How's Samuel? How often does he wake up? Are you feeding him yourself? How soon before you give him a brother or sister?" And it would be as though I didn't exist. As though I was merely a vessel for baby production. They'd all want to hold him too, and I hated that. I needed him close to me. James squeezed my shoulder.
"Ideally, we need to be out the house in an hour, but we could push it by another 15 minutes if that works better for you and Samuel. I know you're tired, but hopefully Samuel will sleep in the car, and you can have a nap too."
Fingers crossed. He gently pushed a strand of wet hair behind my ear, then brushed his thumb over my cheekbone, gazing at me with such love that my heart started to race. Was he going to kiss me? We hadn't kissed properly since we brought Samuel home from hospital. That evening we'd laid on our bed, with our new baby between us, all bundled up in a soft-knitted blanket, fast asleep. James thanked me for giving him a beautiful son, and kissed me with such tenderness that my insides felt like liquid. That was almost 4 months ago. Since then it had been quick pecks, brief hugs and lengthy arguments. Samuel sneezed and the moment broke. Reality returned. "I'll be ready in half an hour," I muttered, dropping the croissant back on the plate, my appetite gone. How had I not registered that it was Nancy's birthday today? Thank God James had sorted out the card and gift, because if it had been left to me, that could have been awkward. Upstairs, I paused by Samuel's nursery. I'd planned to order him something special to wear. Messed that up too. Maybe he already had something. It had been a tough pregnancy, and, stuck at home under strict orders to rest and avoid stress, I'd been hideously bored. So I shopped online. Quite a lot. I might have got a tad carried away. We'd been given clothes as gifts too, and I seem to remember someone, no idea who, had bought him a cute trouser, shirt and cardigan combo. That would be perfect. I opened the wardrobe door and a pile of freshly washed but unfolded clothes tumbled out. Crap. I'd forgotten about shoving them in there ready to sort out later. I stared in dismay at the pile on the floor, and then at what remained in the wardrobe. Why hadn't I had the foresight to organise anything before Samuel came along? Why was everything all jumbled up, still in gift bags or delivery packages? The wardrobe had 2 rails full of pale blue plastic hangers, and they'd never been used. Shuddering at the enormity of the task, I shook my head, left the nursery and closed the door. The outfit he was wearing would have to do. If only I could get away with my PJs.
I'll go and do the shopping while you're getting sorted. James called up the stairs. Samuel's and his bouncer. Do you want me to bring him up? I'll come down and get him. OK, see you soon. I peeked out of the front window and watched him reverse off the drive and exit our street, undecided on how I felt about his supermarket run. There'd be food in the house tomorrow, a good thing. But did he have to be such a martyr? It made me feel even more guilty that I'd failed to accomplish something as simple as the online shop. And him going out also meant that I needed to look after Samuel again. So much for giving me some time to get ready in peace. Sighing, I went downstairs. Samuel was in his bouncer in the middle of the lounge floor. I bent down to pick it up and frowned. Was that James's phone on the rug? He must have put it down while he strapped Samuel in and had forgotten to retrieve it. I lifted up the phone and stared at it. Should I? I'd never checked his phone before, although it had crossed my mind shortly before Samuel was born, when I'd suspected James might be having an affair. How wrong could I have been? He'd actually been having treatment for testicular cancer, thankfully now in remission, but hadn't wanted to tell me about his diagnosis while I was meant to be avoiding stress. Typical James, putting me first. Promise me you won't tell Daddy, I said to Samuel. If I get his PIN code wrong on the first attempt, it's a sign that I'm not meant to check. I tapped in his birthday. Wrong. 3 attempts, but that's it. I'll probably be locked out after that anyway. My heart raced as our wedding date unlocked the screen. I stared at the phone, then put it back down on the floor. I couldn't do it. It wasn't right. But then again, if he'd been stupid enough to leave it lying around, he was inviting a spot of snooping. I picked it up again. Where first, Samuel? Texts, you say? Toby's top of the list. Let's see your daddy slagging me off and asking about Samantha. I scanned through the recent conversations with his best friend. Boring. All the texts were about football, golf, a sci-fi series they were both into, and confirmation of times and places to meet up. Conversations with his mum were dull too, the subjects including the weather, gossip about her neighbours, and her bunion troubles. There were loads of texts to her sister, his Aunt Beatrice, but they were all about the surprise party and our birthday gift of a weekend away for the pair of them. No mention of me. I scrolled down his text list further, past texts from me, his boss, and his mobile phone provider. Nothing. Emails? I asked Samuel. James's inbox appeared to be full of marketing emails. Then I stopped scrolling, heart thumping, as one name jumped out at me. Oh my God! I clicked into the email. My cheeks flushed, and I started shaking as I worked my way back through a series of 3 messages. No! No! Oh, James! Why? And why her? The phone slipped from my hand and onto the rug. I swallowed down the panic rising in my throat. This was going to wreck everything.
Chapter 3. Samantha. I felt like a pack horse as I led the way across the gravel farmyard and along the wide path in front of the house, Chloe traipsing behind me with her handbag hooked over one shoulder, holding Samuel out to the side. Somehow, I'd ended up with Samuel's changing bag and a large sports bag strapped across either shoulder, a backpack on my back, and 2 large bin bags in each hand. Stuffing everything into bin bags strongly signalled leaving in a hurry, and it was killing me not knowing what had happened. Not because I was intrigued by any potential gossip, absolutely not my thing, but because I was worried. My cousin was prone to the dramatics, but packing up and leaving in a rush seemed extreme, even for her. I pushed open the front door and paused on the step as a thought struck me. James does know you've left him. She looked down and kicked at some gravel on the path. I thought you said we needed to get Samuel bathed and changed. We do, but so stop asking me complicated questions. She pushed past me into the large hall and placed Samuel's carrier down. Inwardly sighing, I closed the door behind us. Shafts of light filtered through the glass panels round the door, illuminating the green, cream and blue patterned Victorian tiles. I usually felt lifted the moment I stepped inside, welcomed back into my beautiful home, but right now I felt uneasy as I dropped the bin bags onto the tiles, removed the other bags and rolled my burning shoulders. Chloe glanced towards the staircase. "Where can I get showered and changed?" "What about Samuel?" Her lip quivered and tears sparkled in her eyes. "I was hoping you could do it. He'll need feeding afterwards, and if I don't get showered now, I won't get a chance. I'm covered in sick. Please, Sammy." So we were back to using Sammy, were we? After the rift, she ditched the affectionate shortened name that she, Dad and Josh called me, and it had become more formal. But now that she needed something from me... I could have pointed out that Samuel had been rear-facing and there was no way Chloe could be covered in sick unless she'd tried to clean him up, which she hadn't. But what would that achieve? The important thing here was this little baby, and I wasn't going to let him fester in soggy, smelly clothes any longer. "I'll need the main bathroom, so you can use the ensuite in my bedroom. It's the last door at the front of the house." "Towels?" "In the storage cupboard in the main bathroom, second door at the back of the house." Chloe grabbed the sports bag from me and ran up the stairs, no doubt desperate to get away before I changed my mind. I gazed down at Samuel and my heart went out to him. "Hang on a bit longer, little one. As soon as I've found some clothes, I'll have you sorted." Crouching down, I untied one of the bin bags. It looked as though Chloe had swept the entire contents of Samuel's wardrobe and drawers into it, as everything was in a jumbled-up mess, and there were even clothes still in gift bags and online delivery packages. I found a t-shirt for his age, but couldn't find any trousers that would fit. I untied the next bag with no success. Sick of rummaging, I grabbed a baby blue sleepsuit. "Sorry, sweetheart, this will have to do for now. Your stuff needs some serious sorting." Samuel remained asleep while I peeled his clothes off in the family bathroom and flung them straight into a bin bag with the soiled nappy. The vomit would have washed out, but I wasn't convinced about the other incident. Best to just dispose of the lot. As soon as I lowered him into Lottie's Pooh Bear baby bath within the large claw foot bath, his eyes opened and he emitted the most ear-piercing scream. Not that I could blame him. I cursed Chloe under my breath for abandoning me and then cursed myself for letting her. The state Samuel was in, this was definitely a two-person job, especially as the water needed refreshing after I'd initially sponged off the worst of the mess. Goodness knows how I'd have managed if I hadn't got used to handling slippery babies through helping bathe Lottie and Archie over the past couple of weeks. "It's all right," I said in what I hope sounded like soothing tones, despite me feeling far from relaxed at that point. "Not long, and then we'll get you in some fresh clothes and your mummy can feed you." He continued to screech. I'd thought Archie and Lottie were loud, but even when their cries were combined, Samuel eclipsed them. Poor Chloe and James, their ears were probably ringing. Samuel's cries reduced to whimpers by the time I'd dried him off and secured his fresh nappy. I was fastening the final few poppers on his sleepsuit when the doorbell rang. "Chloe!" I called, poking my head out of the bathroom. The shower in the ensuite was still going, so I grabbed a fresh towel and swathed Samuel in it to keep him warm before making my way downstairs. An auburn-haired woman of about my age stood on the doorstep. "Is this where I bring Polly hedgehogs?" she asked before smiling at Samuel, who nuzzled into my shoulder. "Yes, I'm Samantha. Hi." "Hi, this hedgehog has been curled up in my front garden for a few hours. My next-door neighbour says they shouldn't be out in daylight. Is that right?" "Mainly. Mums can be out foraging for food or materials for a nest during the day, but they'd normally be moving quickly and with purpose. If there's one stationary or slow-moving during the day, it's very likely something's wrong." She opened up the handles on a bag for life. "Sorry, I didn't have anything else to put it in." I peered into the bag. A large hedgehog with mainly dark spines was curled up in the middle. "Do you know what's wrong with it?" the woman asked. "I couldn't tell you without picking it up and..." I indicated Samuel. "I adore babies, so I don't mind holding him. I'd love to know that the hedgehog's okay before I go." She gently placed the bag down and I passed over Samuel. As I pulled on the pair of thick gloves I kept by the door, I smiled at her cooing over him. "Fly strike," I announced after I'd given the hedgehog a quick check. "You see these white bits?" I pointed to a couple of patches of what looked like small grains of rice between the spines. "These are fly eggs which, if left, would hatch into maggots, which would then burrow into the hedgehog's skin and can cause some serious damage." "Oh, that's disgusting." "It's really common and it's easily treated when the hedgehog is brought in quickly before the eggs hatch." I turned the hog over and it allowed me to unfurl it briefly before curling back into a ball. It was enough time to check the gender. It was a male, which meant I didn't need to worry about a nest of abandoned hoglets somewhere. "Would you like him releasing back into your garden?" She screwed up her face. "I'd like to say yes, but I work away a lot. You'd struggle to catch me at home. Can he be released here instead?" "That's fine. Thanks for bringing him in. Do you want your bag back?" She laughed lightly. "Fly eggs? Maggots? I might pass on that." "Probably a good idea." She handed Samuel over, then left. "Well, young Samuel, our new arrival needs treatment quickly, so Mummy is going to have to take care of you whether she's ready or not." Leaving the hedgehog in its bag by the door, I took the stairs 2 at a time, calling Chloe's name. She didn't respond, but the shower had stopped. I knocked on my bedroom door, then went straight in to find her standing in front of my cheval mirror, wrapped in a towel with a towel turban on her head, prodding the skin round her eyes and frowning. "I'll need to leave Samuel with you," I said. She spun round, looking surprised to see me there. "I'm not dressed." "Then get dressed, I've got a hedgehog emergency." "What am I supposed to do with Samuel?" "Whatever you normally do while you get dressed." I didn't have time for a discussion. I glanced round the room in despair. What a mess! There were a couple of soggy towels dumped on the stripped floorboards, and she'd emptied the contents of her sports bag all over the bed. Trying not to sigh, I shoved everything aside, grabbed our pillows, positioned them in a square in the middle of the bed, and placed Samuel in between. "See you later." Chloe's protests followed me down the stairs, and as I closed the front door, it struck me that I'd rather listen to Samuel's cries than Chloe when she was in full whinge mode. "Don't worry, little one," I said as I took the hedgehog over to the barn. "I'll soon get rid of those nasty fly eggs and you'll feel so much better." Gently placing the bag on the floor, I disinfected the treatment table, covered it in blue paper towel, grabbed a new chart and the scales, then weighed the hedgehog. "You're a good weight," I told him, scribbling it down on his chart. "Would you like a name?" We'd started with hedgehog-related names like Spikette, Sonic and Mrs. Tiggywinkle, but quickly exhausted ideas and moved on to famous characters from books or movies. Although we'd barely scratched the surface on that category, I fancied a change. How about classic authors? Thomas's favourite book was Great Expectations, so you can be Dickens. It suits you. I set about cleaning up Dickens. Although there were several patches of fly strike, the cuts beneath them weren't deep. It looked as though he'd squeezed under some barbed wire or something similar, and it had scraped him in several places. Eggs typically hatched within 12 hours of being laid, so the woman's quick reaction in bringing Dickens in had made a massive difference. Time was so important, which was why I'd had to put my foot down with Chloe. By the time I'd cleaned Dickens up, giving him a shot of antibiotics and settled him into a crate with food and water, some of the hoglets had started squeaking, so it was feeding time once more, which was quite a task. We'd had triplets brought in during the week, bringing our hoglets total up to 17, although I only had 14 to hand feed, as 3 were with their mum, Trinity. 4 more adults had joined us, but we'd released a couple of healed patients, so, including Dickens, we now had 24 adults. As I plugged in the heat pads and prepared the formula, my thoughts returned to Chloe and James. What could possibly have gone wrong for Chloe to pack up her stuff and turn up unannounced at the farm? It had to be bad, otherwise she'd have moved in with her mum instead, so she clearly wanted to be somewhere less obvious and put some distance between her and James. I was convinced James knew nothing about her leaving. She'd evaded my direct question, and why else would everything be hastily shoved into bin bags? He had to be worried sick, assuming he'd discovered she was gone. I doubted Chloe had left him a note. Running out was far more her style. Could James have rung me on the off chance she'd turned up? Could Auntie Louise have? My phone had been charging on the kitchen worktop when I'd seen the car approaching, and I'd rushed out without picking it up. It was still there now. Tomorrow would signify exactly 2 years since Chloe and James did the dirty on me. Much as I hated what they'd done, I couldn't deny that they were perfectly suited. James's calm, considered, mature approach to life seemed to balance out Chloe's impulsive, reckless and often juvenile outlook. He definitely brought out the best in her. Or at least he had before they'd married. I had little experience of them as a married couple, having been pushed out of Chloe's life at their wedding. What if that amazing first year together had been down to the excitement of a new relationship and a wedding on the horizon? What if the reality of married life, then straight into expecting their first child, had been too mundane for Chloe? And, with James's diagnosis with testicular cancer, they'd had a lot to deal with. Had it been too much? I hoped not, because it would be very sad for them and for Samuel if it was over already. If Chloe wanted to stay here and wanted my help, I just hoped she'd fill me in. James was bound to track her down to Hedgehog Hollow, assuming he wanted to find her, and the last thing I wanted or needed was to be stuck in the middle of a war between my ex-boyfriend and my semi-hostile cousin.
Chapter 4. Chloe. I'd heard Samuel screeching while I was in the shower. Even an extractor fan and a torrent of water hadn't been able to drown out the worst sound in the world. Looking at him sound asleep on Sam and Josh's bed right now, with his hands curled into little fists by his ears, his soft blonde hair like a cap of fluff, it was hard to reconcile that it was the same baby. Shame it wouldn't last. He'd be awake and demanding food soon. I shuddered at the thought of that ordeal. I removed the towel turban from my head and shook out my hair. Washing it twice in 1 week was a novelty. Twice in 1 day was unnecessary and indulgent. But how else was I going to get a moment to think, especially after the journey from hell? I'd been stressed enough trying to gather everything together before James arrived home, without having to stop to feed Samuel, and then him decorating the car soon after. I should have stopped and tried to clean him up. I knew that now, but at the time, all I could think about was getting some distance between me and Whitsborough Bay, fast. I pulled on a pair of black leggings and rummaged for a t-shirt among the pile of my clothes on Sam's bed. I lifted one up and opened it out, and tears pricked my eyes as I stared at the "World's Best Mummy" slogan emblazoned across it. James's eyes had shone with excitement when he presented me with it, and a matching World's Best baby sleep suit for Samuel a fortnight after he was born. I'd laughed, said it was adorable, and worn it proudly the following day. But that was the last day of James's paternity leave. That was the last day as a happy family of 3. I hadn't felt anything remotely resembling happy again after that, and everything had started to fall apart without him. World's best mummy? What a joke. World's biggest failure, more like. I hadn't been able to bring myself to wear it again, and I certainly couldn't wear it now. Another rummage, and I found a creased but clean plain pink t-shirt, and pulled that on instead. I gazed round the room. It was beautifully decorated, in a pale duck egg blue on 3 walls, and a darker shade behind the bedhead. 2 large windows either side of the bed looked straight out over fields. The farmyard and the barn where Sam ran her hedgehog rescue centre were to the left, but I'd need to be by the window to actually see them. Feeling weary, but not wanting to sit on the bed for fear of prematurely disturbing Samuel, I lowered myself to the floor and dragged my handbag towards me. My heart thumped as I reached inside for my phone. 17 missed calls, from a mixture of James, Mum and Dad. 5 voicemails, a stack of text messages. A tear trickled down my cheek as I numbly dropped my phone back into the bag. Not now. I rested my head against the foot of the wooden bed, and looked up at the canvas of a wildflower meadow on the wall opposite me. The colours were vibrant yet soothing at the same time. Gazing at it, I could imagine the flowers swaying in a gentle breeze, hear the bees buzzing, feel the... My eyelids started to droop. And now I was wide awake. Again. I pulled myself up and, moments later, Samuel was latched on, while I shut my eyes tightly, trying to block out the pain.
Chapter 5. Samantha. After a full round of hoglet feeds, I returned to the farmhouse in search of Chloe. I could hear Samuel's cries as I approached. It was just past 4 and I felt a twinge of guilt for abandoning her for a couple of hours. Hopefully she'd understand that I had a business to run and couldn't drop everything just because she'd turned up out of the blue demanding accommodation. It had only been fortunate timing on her part that I'd been between feeds when she'd arrived, so had been able to bathe and change Samuel for her. In the lounge, I found her pacing the floor, hair dishevelled, cheeks red, attempting to soothe Samuel by bouncing him in her arms. Except it looked more like the poor lad was on the receiving end of an electric shock, being jolted up and down. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded over his cries, her eyes flashing with anger. My twinge of guilt fled the building. Hedgehog emergency and hoglet feeding. Cup of tea? My refusal to get sucked into an argument was either going to inflame her further or calm her. I prayed for the latter. "That would be nice," she said, her voice softening. "Coming right up." I strained my ears for a thank you as I stepped into the hall. None came. A thank you from Chloe was a rare and precious gift. In the kitchen, I checked my phone. There were missed calls and texts from James and Auntie Louise as expected. I clicked into the first voicemail, left at 11:37 a.m. "Sam, it's James. I'm sorry to bother you, but I don't suppose you've heard from Chloe. Let me know. Cheers." He sounded quite cheery in that message, but the second one, left 15 minutes later, told a different story. "Hi, Sam. Sorry, it's me again. Chloe's gone, and she's taken Samuel, but I don't know where they are. I got back from the shops to find their stuff gone. No note, no warning. She's not answering her phone, and I'm getting really worried now. Can you call me, even if you haven't heard anything?" I ran my hand through my hair and sighed. So I'd been right, and she hadn't let him know. That wasn't fair. I'd always thought of James as the ideal person to have around in a crisis because he seemed to be able to keep a cool head no matter what. But who could keep a cool head when their wife and son had just vanished? There was one more message from him left at 12:18 p.m. This time, he sounded weary. "Me again. I'm on my way to York. It's my mum's 60th and there's a surprise meal planned. I'm the one picking her up and I'm so late, but I can't not go. I'll have my phone on. Please, please get in touch if you hear anything. She might even turn up at yours. She's not at her mum's and I can't think where else she'd go. If she is with you, don't panic. I'm not going to turn up tonight and try to drag her back. I don't know why she left, but she obviously needs some time away from me and I'm going to respect that for now. I just need to know they're both safe." There was a voicemail from Auntie Louise, too. "Hi, Sam. I know James has already left a message. Chloe's not here or at your mum's. We have to assume she's with you. Where else would she be? I don't know what's going on between them to make her leave, and right now I don't really care. The important thing is that Chloe and my grandson are okay. Please can you let me know either way? Thanks, sweetheart." I put my phone down with a sigh. I'd make a fresh brew and try to convince Chloe to at least call Auntie Louise, even if she didn't want to speak to James. If she refused, I'd call them both myself. It wasn't fair to let them stew, no matter what James had done, or what Chloe thought he'd done. She did have form, after all, for letting her imagination run away with her. When I returned to the lounge with the drinks, Chloe had her back to me and was still trying to soothe the screaming Samuel. In the mirror on the other side of the room, I could see her wiping her wet cheeks before she turned round. "He's trying out for the Baby Olympics. I think it's a safe gold in the loudest cry competition. Don't you?" Her voice cracked and tears glistened in her eyes, even though she had a smile plastered across her face. I'd talk about making contact with Auntie Louise and James once Samuel was placated. "Why don't you sit down and have your tea while I give him cuddles?" She didn't need any convincing. I'd no sooner put the mugs down on the coffee table than he was thrust into my hands. He paused, looking at me with big blue eyes, then started to howl again. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" I adjusted my hold and the smell hit me. I turned to Chloe. "He's filled his nappy again. That's why he's crying." "But you just bathed and changed him." "I know, but you fed him since then. Given what's happened in the car, he's probably got a dodgy tummy." With a sigh, Chloe put her mug down and made to get up. "It's okay. I'll change him. You drink your tea." She picked up her mug again, but she didn't look at me or thank me. "All clean and happy now," I said to Chloe as I returned to the lounge 10 minutes later. Samuel's cries had eased as soon as I had him cleaned up and in a fresh nappy, but I'd wanted him to be fully settled before I came back downstairs, allowing Chloe some time to gather herself together. It didn't take a genius to see that she was struggling with Samuel, and possibly had been for quite some time. "I honestly couldn't smell anything." Chloe looked at me, her ice blue eyes all big and innocent. "You have to believe me." "You've probably grown immune to it." There was no way she could have missed it, but I didn't want to make her feel any worse than she clearly already did. When Chloe made no move to take Samuel from me, I sat down on the other end of the corner sofa from her with him on my knee. "I'm listening." "I don't want to talk about it." "And I'm not buying that. What happened with James?" "None of your business."